In my last review, I said that my personal attachment to Donkey Kong Country 2 made it difficult for me to review it properly. If I'm honest, some of that attachment is also true for this game. It's a big part of my childhood and reminds me of my time with my lost brother whenever I play it. That said, I'm not as attached to it as I am the sequel, so I thought I would try to assess the game's strengths and weaknesses objectively based on its own merits. When I think about what makes a good platforming game, the first thing that comes to my mind is tight controls. The game can be visually stunning, but without good control of my character's movement, I'm not going to stick around for very long. The Donkey Kong Country games excel in this department, and I have previously stated that the speed at which Diddy moves is a benchmark for me personally to this day. He's just as nimble and responsive as he would be in the sequel. Donkey is no slouch, though. He feels appropriately heavier, which makes him more adept at disposing of larger variety of enemies. Levels feel more focused here than in any of the sequels. Fewer gimmicks and less complex bonuses equate to an overall more streamlined game in many ways. The levels tend to be shorter and more direct in their approach and platforming as a result. I would not in any way say that the game is superior to its follow-ups, but the shorter levels definitely fit my personal playstyle a little bit better. In 1994, the game was revolutionary because it used pre-rendered graphics. This paved the way for some awe-inspiring visuals in future games on the upcoming 32 and 64-bit hardware. By rendering an image on more powerful machines, still frames could be taken of those renders and used on less powerful consoles. This meant a higher level of fidelity than would be possible natively on that hardware. DKC in particular used this method to display character sprites. For the aging Super Nintendo, it was a real shot in the arm and kept the console relevant longer into the next generation consoles, while Nintendo continued development on the N64. These unique visuals hold up better today on the lower fidelity TVs that the games were designed on. Playing this game on a CRT is more than just a nostalgic experience. It reveals why so many people were taken aback by the graphics the game produced. And to this day on the console, nothing really looks like Donkey Kong Country, except for its two sequels. But good graphics do not make a great game. What sets the game apart is the aforementioned tight controls, the excellent level design, and the music. The music is something truly extraordinary. David Wise went above and beyond in this project to write music that tells a story in each level. The tracks are long and show a lot of variety, even throughout a single track. All the tracks are great and are definitely worth adding to your playlist. The levels of DKC are less gimmick-based than the sequels, and to me, this is a strength. The variety is more akin to something like Sonic the Hedgehog, in that there are high and low routes. Skilled players might be rewarded for taking a skyward route through levels, but newer players are not punished for sticking closer to the ground. Later levels lose some of this variety, but compensate with increased difficulty overall. The shorter levels mean that the challenge never overstays its welcome, which lowers frustration compared to some of the levels in the sequels. All that said, there are some things that, depending on your preference, definitely needed and received improvements. Bonus levels do not feel as unique to discover nor as valuable to complete. I'm not a big bonus level player, but even I would freely admit that the bonuses in DKC 2 and 3 are better. The bosses also feel a little undercooked. Several of them are palette swaps, and one is literally a can that throws normal stage enemies at you. Honestly though, neither of these are off-putting to me. I'm here for the platforming, stage design, and music. But your mileage may vary depending on which aspects of a game are more important to you. Even 30 years later, this game still feels special. The art, the music, the levels are a marvel and stand as a testament to what is possible on the 16-bit hardware. Someone recently called into question, why play old games? Why not appreciate what is new instead of what is old? But this game does not feel old to me at all. Honestly though, without these old games, we would not have new ones to play. They built a solid foundation of design that to this day just works. DKC is not a great old game. It is a great game, period. And if you can play it, you really should. I know the title of this video is something like DKC2 Review, but it's really not possible for me to review this game. In 1996, I was 13 years old, and this game had been out for less than a year. My mom and dad grew up with Donkey Kong in the arcade, so they were familiar with the brand name, and had bought me and my brother the original Donkey Kong Country when it came out. So they surprised us with a sequel, and my brother and I began a journey that, for as long as I live, I hope I will never forget. My brother was 11 years old in 96. The two of us were only 21 months apart in age. He was big for his age, and I was sort of small, and a lot of people thought we were twins. That's how close we were. We had an NES growing up, playing games like Mario 3, since it was the best game we had at the time. But with the new console generation, Lee got a Genesis, and I got a SNES. We had moved into a new house, and we set aside a third bedroom in the house for a game room for both of us. And I remember playing Sonic 2 and Super Mario World and Jurassic Park and Power Rangers and Donkey Kong Country. But Donkey Kong Country 2 Dee Dee's Conquest was different. Lee and I had played a lot of games growing up, but we'd never beaten one before. That was not the point for us. We just came in and played for a few minutes and then went back outside. But when DKC2 came out, we were just old enough, just skilled enough, that we were ready to beat a game for the very first time. We chose Donkey Kong Country 2 because we both liked it a lot, and because it had something we desperately needed: save slots. Now, I know I have listed a few games already that have saves, but none of those games were Donkey Kong Country 2. It looked different, it felt different, and most importantly of all, it had two-player co-op and was tailor-made for the two of us. I love Diddy Kong. The speed in which he moves is still a benchmark for me personally as to how fast a character should move in a video game, specifically a platformer. His roll hitting a lot of enemies is so satisfying, and he feels agile to control. Lee loved Dixie. The ability to fly and explore and to open up the level is what he most enjoyed doing. My son today plays games very similar to my brother. He enjoyed the game within the game. Dee Dee was my choice because he was fast and efficient, point A to point B. Lee loved Dixie because she was perfect for exploring the world. I remember swapping so that Lee could play as her because he would see something on the horizon that he wanted to go explore, but then I would get impatient with him exploring and want to get switched back to Dee Dee so we could beat the level. I remember blitzing through a level so much that his frustration would boil over as I was passing up bonus areas and extra bananas. This is a feature of Donkey Kong Country 2 that does not really get a lot of attention. People talk about the levels and the music and the graphics, and rightfully so, but the complementary set of Dixie and Diddy is possibly the best implementation of the two hits before you die ever conceived. They're so different, but you can beat every level with both of them. The ability to swap and co-op during gameplay just made us want to play more. It did not feel like a little brother game. We felt like partners with roles to play. It took us weeks to get through to World 6. As we climbed K. Rool's Keep, the challenge grew exponentially, but we climbed up together to the top, making it all the way to Toxic Tower. We had fought with the game and fought with each other, but we were so close. You have to remember this was before you could check guides online for help. Everything we figured it out on our own. The music used to keep us going in the most difficult levels. We'd never heard music like it. It was just like today, playing the game. The music makes the journey possible. You'll try again just to hear the tune playing. Climbing the world map, we knew we were close to the end. It was late May of 2006, and we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. But the final ascent would have to wait. My family had planned a vacation to Missouri with some friends, and we were going to not take the SNES with us. As excited as we were ready to take a break from the game. We knew that when we got back from the trip, we would beat it, that the game would be over. On the trip, we would talk about levels that we loved and how we needed to farm for some lower lives before we made the final push to the end. We discussed going back and trying to beat Clubba or search for more Crim coins to see what they did when you collected them all. We laughed, we played, we dreamed. I remember walking into the house from the trip alone. I left the house with an older brother, but came back home as an only child. My cousins were waiting for me. I learned later that our parents were worried how I would react coming home to an empty house. Our rooms were right across the hall from one another, but I had to pass his room to get to mine. The door was closed, but I went in anyway, despite everyone telling me not to. I picked up his toys, I sat on his bed, looked around the empty room. He was never going to sleep in that bed again, or play with those toys again. The finality of it was crushing, and I was hurting like I never thought possible before. I barely remember anything between the empty room and the day of the funeral. There's one thing I do remember. I moved the SNES to another room, plugged it into that TV, and I played Donkey Kong Country 2. I was determined to finish what we started. I played every moment that I could. I died over and over and over again, pushing through Toxic Tower, trying to reach the top. When I finally did, the game surprises you with one more level before the final boss, and I struggled to navigate Squawks through the maze faster and faster. Then it was the final fight, and I struggled through phase after phase, pushing further and further into that boss fight. And then it happened. Donkey Kong is free. He punches K. Rool out of the airship, and it was over. We had done it. Then I put the game down, and I did not play it again for over a decade. I loved the game, don't get me wrong, but it was painful for me. I grew up, went to college, got married, had children before I touched the game again. I picked up a blue clamshell Game Boy Advance and was looking for some games to play on it. I think it was around 2013. And I was at a little game store and I found a Game Boy Advance copy of DKC2. I played through that version and beat it, and all that did was make me want a SNES copy. So I found one of those about a year or so later and played through it. Satisfied, I put the game on my shelf, and there it sat for about 10 years or so. I'd bring it down and play it once in a while, going through the first few levels, but I never seriously played it more than once until now. My intention has been to review it for a long time, and I find that I can't really look at the game subjectively. When it frustrates me, I can't fully tell if it's because of the pain of the memories it brings, and when I enjoy it, I wonder if I'm blinded by the joy of those same memories. Its best and worst features are amplified to me. But there is no doubt that the game affects me. I would not say anything as melodramatic as the game saved my life. My faith, family, friends continue to do that even to this day. But the game is like a little time capsule for me. A balm for an old wound that I apply occasionally when I feel nostalgic or when I miss my brother. I think it's cool that games can do that. When I play it, I feel taken back to that little room in that house I grew up in. And he's sitting there impatiently waiting for his turn. When I die over and over again in the level, I wish that he was there to take over for a bit and push through. DKC2 is special to me because it is one of the few things left in my life that I can touch, that connects me to a person that I can no longer hold. When I feel my memory dim with age, it is a checkpoint that revives my memory, both good and bad. Because in the end, a lot of nostalgia for everyone is the fear of forgetting, of losing a part of who you once were because of the demands of who you are now. I don't want to forget. So every once in a while I pull down this game and I remember, even if it's painful. And to me, anyway, that one feature, though not developer intended, makes it one of the best games ever made. Unlike the last two reviews I have written, I have no nostalgia for this game at all. It's the first time I've ever even beaten it. I do have nostalgia for the brand, Donkey Kong Country, of course. I've played the game several times over the last few years, but I've always put it back on the shelf after the first few levels, and usually went back and played one of the other games in the series that I just grew up with. Something always felt a little off about the game, and I just never felt compelled to complete it. Until now. I put it to a vote, and you guys decided it would be the next series for our Let's Play channel, and the whole reason I have a Let's Play channel is so I can capture footage for reviews, so it seems the right time to talk about my thoughts on the game itself. The first level of the game starts out with the familiar. Not the setting, that's totally different. But playing as Dixie, you feel right at home. Dixie's not my favorite of the Kongs to play, though, if I'm honest. And the first time you lose her, and Kiddy Kong steps up, that familiarity starts to work against you. I love the first game of the series, but Dixie was an improvement over Donkey in the gameplay department. But Kiddy does not feel better to play than Donkey, and he feels far away from playing as Diddy. For the longest time, I couldn't put my finger on why this was the case, because honestly, he doesn't even feel as good as playing as Donkey in the first game. I know exactly what it is now, though. It's not the way he controls. His movement is fine, and I like the way he carries his barrel in front of him. I like his little animations. Some of his character that comes through in the animations is really good. I don't really like the scream he has when he dies or you lose a life, but, you know, can't... It's basically a big baby, right? That's what they were going for. But I finally figured out what the problem is. The problem is his hitbox. It's way too big. I mean, Donkey's was big in the original game, but like compared to this game, maybe it was the design. Like, you know, when you think about the original Donkey Kong Country, you have Donkey Kong as the main character, Diddy as the secondary character. So all the levels are designed around Donkey, and Diddy works well in them because he's small. But this game is not designed around Kiddy Kong. It's designed around Dixie. And Dixie is smaller. And so her smaller hitbox usually serves as the measuring stick for enemy placement. If you want a tight squeeze to get the characters through, then, you know, they measured it based off of Dixie. It's just what the game, you know, she's the main character of the game. And, you know, in DKC2, this was not a problem because, you know, both the characters are the same size. And in the original DKC, it wasn't a problem because Diddy, the secondary character in that game, was smaller than Donkey, who was the main character. But making your secondary character bigger, and I'm not exactly sure this is the design philosophy that went into it, but Kiddy just feels too big, or his hitbox feels too big for the small spaces that the game often tries to get you to get through. It can be agonizingly frustrating to navigate him through levels when Dixie is not there to carry him. I think if his hitbox was just a little bit smaller, or if the enemy placement considered his size better, I would have no complaints in the control department at all. The game would feel much, much better than it does. Graphically, though, the game's color palette is unique compared to the first two. It feels more cartoon-like. The brighter and rounder enemies and character sprites really shine through. The colors are brighter. I do not necessarily prefer it to DKC2, as I like the previous entry setting and theme. I mean, pirates, how do you top that? But the game is more graphically impressive when it comes to the quality of the pre-rendered elements and the effects. The N64 had been out for about 2 months by the time the game was released, but this game makes an argument for the continued relevance of the Super Nintendo. That relevance is displayed even today as homegrown games and modern releases emulate that 16-bit style. That said, few of these games dip into the pre-rendered style, and I think that the appearance of DKC3 in particular makes a compelling argument that a game could be made today with those methods and it would be mechanically and graphically impressive. I hear a lot of people dog on pre-rendered characters and that were popular during that sort of 16-bit to 32-bit transition, that they don't look very good. But this game looks really good, and it looks good even on more modern displays than just on CRTs. I mean, obviously it looks better on a CRT because that's what it was designed for, but it doesn't look bad on an LCD. And I don't know, I've sort of come around in my thinking about pre-rendered graphics the more I've been playing these games. So my really only criticism that I have for Donkey Kong Country 2 was the increased number of levels that relied on gimmicks to provide variety to the player. I'm aware that this is a subjective opinion, but to me, any element added for variety should never be at the expense of player control. And while DKC2 dipped into this territory a few times, DKC3 goes all in. Ellie's levels, the elephant, where she's afraid of mice, or the last level of the game where the pink gas reverses your controls, and these are especially egregious examples. The worst level for me in the game was the coin dozer level with the enemies that mad dog you until you fall into a pit. That said, I like DKC2. Not all of them are bad. I particularly like the green gas moon physics level and a few others, but they add variety without sacrificing player control. In a platform game in particular, player control has to come first when designing any level, and some of the levels in the game feel like the gimmick is in the driver's seat. When it does come together properly, the game can be every bit as good as any of the others in the series. The bosses in this game are no joke. I think that the team must have had, something to prove when designing them. Almost all of them have multiple stages and take several hits to take down. They usually have very specific methods planned by the developer for dispatching them, and you have very little room to be creative in your approach or to even make mistakes. They feel a generation away from the bosses in the original game. Really, the secret to them is pattern memorization more than player skill. Spending lives to learn where to stand and when to strike is not my favorite boss strategy when you have limited lives. In games like Hollow Knight, it works well because you have infinite lives and the consequences for death are, there, but they're not tied to a system that starts you back over whenever you die so many times. It can be really frustrating to only have a few lives to go through before you have to navigate to a title screen again to get back to where you were. The music's good as well. It never quite rises to the level of its predecessors. I'm not really qualified to review games music mechanically. What I can tell you is that none of the tracks stay with me quite like the songs from DKC 1 and 2. They're good, but not as memorable. Indeed, they might be the most appropriate way to sum up my experience with the game in general. It was good, but just not as memorable as the other two. At least not for me. Your mileage may vary, and if someone told me that the third was their all-time favorite, I could totally see why. Honestly, I might feel the same way if Kitty's hitbox was just a little bit smaller, or if he was just Diddy Kong or Donkey. In closing, this is a good game, worth anyone's time, but there's a reason it's not as revered as the other two in the series. The only area in which it outshines what came before is in its presentation. The unique world map and stunning visuals for the Super Nintendo are still a standout to this day, but as far as the overall experience, it falls a little short in my opinion. Should you play it? Yes. Yes, you should absolutely. It is worth your time. Honestly, it was never going to be the best on the Super Nintendo. It was made in a time and a place where it was an afterthought rather than the flagship attraction. Rare was already moving on to bigger, better things on the N64. But that's okay. It's still well put together, graphically impressive, and entertaining romp that if you can play, you totally should.